Hey everyone, I'm Ian Douglas, the author of the website techinterview.guide. I do live streams every Sunday and Thursday at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern about topics relevant to interview preparation for the tech industry. I occasionally record longer Q&A sessions, and I've started to break those into smaller videos to post. And there'll be information at the end of this video about how to get in contact with me if you have additional questions. Let's get to it. All right, this is an interesting one. So as an interviewer yourself, have you developed any quick interview techniques to eliminate liars, fakers, and BS? I think after a while as an interviewer, you can start to kind of spot, when someone's really embellishing something on their resume, or they're like, it's pretty clear that they, don't know something. One of the first tech interviews I ever did in California, it was like 2002, 2003, somewhere in there. And there was a guy that applied for a job, and we were looking for someone that knew how to do like networking, where they were actually connecting physical network hardware together. And someone applied and said, "Oh yeah, I totally know this piece of equipment that you're trying to do." And we were, because it's not just a thing of like plug in the wire and it's good to go. You have to go in and you have to like write a whole bunch of configuration files that actually get stored in the little piece of equipment itself. And this guy's resume is like, "Oh yeah, I know all that stuff." Well, we started interviewing him. He's like, "Oh yeah, I've done all that. No problem." And we're like, "You really know this very specific piece of equipment?" He's like, "Well, I'm familiar with kind of the general kind of concept of that." And the more we drilled into it, the more we're like, "So you've actually gone in and you did the configuration on the inside of this thing?" It was a piece of Cisco equipment, and the operating system back then was actually called iOS, not to be confused with Apple's iOS mobile platform. And he's like, "Well, no, I didn't go in and I didn't actually write that configuration part, but I've managed to maintain the equipment." We're like, "Okay, well, all there is the configuration. So were you responsible for installing the actual hardware?" And he's like, "Well, no." And we're like, "Well, what did you actually do?" And it turns out he was responsible. He was the guy up in the ceiling, running the actual physical wire and just plugging it into the back of the machine. But on his resume, he said that he knew everything about this particular piece of network equipment. And so over time, we as interviewers, we start to really hone in on questions that can help expose how much you actually know about something. And so if you say you know Python on your resume, it's fair game. I'm going to ask you all kinds of questions about Python, and I'm going to keep asking questions about the things that my company needs you to know about Python until you can't answer those questions anymore, because that's my job as an interviewer, is just to find the limits of your knowledge. It's not that I'm purposely trying to make you feel bad or feel like you're inadequate or something for a job, but I do need to do my due diligence and figure out what you know and what you don't know. And so I'm going to ask more and more specific questions until you don't have any more answers, and then I might back off and I'll change the subject and I'll go on to something else. And so asking a lot of very specific questions can help kind of expose people that have embellished things and say, "Oh yeah, I totally know that thing." I mentioned on the stream previously where I had someone apply for a job, and they had listed probably a few dozen programming languages and also frameworks and just tons and tons of tech experience on their resume. And I'm looking through the resume and I'm like, "Do you really know all of these languages?" And they're like, "Oh yeah, I've done a project in all of those languages." And it turns out it was just like a hello world or like a to-do list kind of tutorial. It was very surface level, what they actually knew. And the biggest thing that tipped me off there was that they were a relatively new grad. They only had a year or two of experience, and yet they claimed to know 20 programming languages and used all these frameworks and built all these elaborate things, or made it sound like they had done so, when clearly that wasn't the case. And so as an interviewer, we just get really good at asking questions, listening to your answer, and then hopefully we're not tied to a script where we're not allowed to go off that script and ask, follow-up questions, so that we can actually dive in and dig in and get a little more specific on the kinds of answers we actually want to hear from you, in order to find out what your actual limit of your knowledge is. And once we find that limit, that's fine. But as soon as we start to find things where you've embellished on your resume, it puts your whole resume into kind of that suspicious territory. And the last thing we want to do is waste our time in an interview. And so if you get us to a point where we start to feel suspicious about your resume, we're probably just going to shut down the interview at that point and just pass on you completely and say, thanks, we're going to not hire you, but thanks for coming in. And if you ask for feedback, we're probably just going to say like, hey, you don't have the level of experience that we wanted you to have in particular areas. And so I generally recommend, like, don't put things on your resume that you can't speak to very specific, like levels of knowledge. Like if you've literally spent an afternoon learning Python, don't put Python on your resume. If you've built a single project in Python, you could maybe list it like at the end of the list of things that you claim to know. And you can put that project on there. If I'm looking for a Python developer though, I'm probably looking for a certain depth of knowledge. And it would probably be better from my perspective as the interviewer for you to show me that you've got a depth of knowledge in some other area and then convince me during the interview how you're going to transfer that knowledge to Python, than to walk in and say, oh yeah, I'm totally a Python developer. Hey, thanks for watching. I love helping people out with interview prep, and I hope this video helped you in some way. If you found this Q&A useful, please consider subscribing. You can follow me on Twitch as well for the live stream twice a week. Check out techinterview.guide/streaming for more information. I also have a daily email series that you can subscribe to on the website. There are never any ads, and when you finish the series, I scrub your information out of my database permanently. Finally, if you have a question that you'd like answered on the stream, you can find my contact info on techinterview.guide. I prefer LinkedIn or email. If you leave your question in a YouTube comment, it might take me longer to find it, but I'll see you next time.